Welcome everybody to our District Plan Submissions Workshop. Great to have the team here, and I will just hand right over to you guys, Paulina, to kick us off.
Thank you very much. And yes, this would be another of the series of workshops related to the district planning. It has been a while since we last saw you, probably nearly a year now since we came to talk about district plans. So today we want to cover what did the people say when we notify. So we're going to cover the submission, the contentious topics, some interesting facts and figures as well, just for your information. And we want to focus as well on things that we might want to change in terms of policy direction, just for you to be aware. I have the team with me here today, so we're going to tag team and present on different topics at each time. I have Brooke. You haven't met Brooke. She's our new graduate in our team, and she's going to take the lead in a couple of the topics as well. Cool. And you have met Connie. She's relatively new as well to our team. And I have Michelle and Jeriel in the back as well. They're going to be talking to you. So we will do another workshop, though, because, as you know, the district plan has about 80 chapters. So we're going to cover a few today, but we're going to come back to you nearly October or November to talk about the other topics as well. So that's the agenda. Facts and figures, variations, hearings, all really part of the process of a district plan review. So you would remember we notified the proposed district plan in September. We went through a submission summary. We notified that submission summary, got a whole lot of further submissions. And now we're busy really preparing the hearing reports for the hearings to commence in November this year. So it has been a long process, but we're getting there. We're getting there with hearings. It's a good part of the process. So starting with the submission facts and figures, some interesting stats. We got 288 submissions. Doesn't seem too much, but they raised nearly 5,000 points. We got 63 further submissions that raised another 2,500 points. So we have to assess each of these points and do an officer reply to this. So that's why we take our time to consider all those points raised and prepare the hearing reports. We also like to highlight that we receive a few late submissions and late further submissions. Those are going to be put forward to the hearing panel for consideration, but officers are really recommending to accept those late submissions. In terms of who submitted, we have a whole range. I mean, I think that the community was pretty much well represented. I have put a few stakeholders, or some of the main stakeholders up there, but we got submissions from our Mana Whenua partners, State Whenua, Mana Ahuriri, MTT. We got energy companies, Forest and Bird, Kangaora, Waka Kotahi. So representation of the government agency, community organizations and groups, energy companies, and Mana Whenua as well as the other individual members of the community. What was interesting, though, there was, at the time that we notified the proposed district plan, some of the neighborhoods got together and they prepared several submissions which were very similar. So we got a little bit of a pattern of repetition in terms of submission because the community got together and distributed some pamphlets aside of the work, the marketing work that we did and the comms plan. And that is good to see. Anyway, they obviously care about what is happening in the neighborhoods as well. So the main issues raised, this would be, I don't know, shouldn't be a surprise for you, but one of the main concern was related to fence heights in the neighborhood. And I think that this could have been a little bit of a misinterpretation of what it means. They think that because we try to lower the heights of the fence, that the council was going to force them to take away what they already have and reduce the height. So there was a little bit of misinterpretation in relation to this one. We got quite a bit of feedback on the medium density and high density zones. This is a recurrent concern across the country. So we introduced the medium density and high density in response to the National Policy Statement of Urban Development. We needed really to intensify, and Napier it has the perfect condition to do something like that, because we have obviously very constrained by natural hazards. Intensification is a very, very good option for Napier to keep the efficient use of our resources, transport corridors, and access to services as well. But people are concerned of things in general terms with shading, amenity issues, the loss of privacy, and those things that obviously are going to change if we move upwards in terms of the direction. There was a lot of interest in, and Fleur would talk in more detail about that, but interested in terms of heritage. Heritage has always been very close to the community. Since we started with the draft district plan in 2020, there have been a number of submissions about heritage. So that theme continue up to now. And noise, despite I was reading in the resident survey that we seem to be doing quite well in terms of managing noise. We receive a lot of submissions about noise, mainly in relation to the airport and the port, the residents around the port, and some other concerns, obviously, from neighborhood noise that can be generated by having intensity developments around the city as well. We got quite a bit of submissions, and Connie would talk a little bit later in detail about the subdivision. So there were quite a few submissions in subdivision, and that is to be expected as well. Developers, and obviously when you have a potential to subdivide, there's economic interest, so people are always submitting in relation to those. And a whole lot of rezoning requests. So Fleur will talk a bit more in detail about that too. So this is pockets of land that people want to rezone. So I'm going to pass now to Connie, and she's going to talk about specific issues.
Kia ora, everyone. I'm tackling a few of the earlier chapters in the district plan. So the first off the cab is strategic direction. Strategic direction doesn't have rules that apply to it. Instead, it's more about the overall thrust of the plan, the general themes that come in. So everything needs to be consistent with this, and this needs to be consistent with everything else. Honestly, really well drafted plan that went up for notification. Not too much attention on the topics on our left-hand side. They were very well supported. We're heading in the right direction. The main areas of interest relate to transport and infrastructure and urban form and development, and that theme is going to be throughout the chapters as well. It's mainly what's at the front of people's minds in the district plan. Just for context, we had 66 submissions on transport and infrastructure and 41 submissions on urban form and development. It's relatively low. It's not insurmountable submissions to deal with. So the most contentious stuff under transport and infrastructure, honestly, it was to do with medium and high density zoning. If we're going to explore this zoning or zoning up, people really brought attention to, like, hey, what about traffic congestion that comes from that? What about the significant infrastructure? Hey, council, have you thought about these wider issues? So some of those submissions we can deal with through the district plan, but some of them are a bit more generally oriented towards council, be like, hey, if you want to upzone, think about these other things. Traffic congestion came up as well. There are a lot of pinpoints in the network, and again, to do with the high density zoning. Excitingly, people were really focused on, so some submissions were really focused on mode neutral approaches to transport. So that's to make sure that we've got provisions for walking, cycling, cars, buses, air. It wasn't too focused on one mode, and it was really supportive. The other part was around significant infrastructure and making sure that we really enable significant infrastructure to be there, to operate, and to be enduring. So we've had two sides of the coin, people that are interested in it, and then those providers also saying, hey, please make us be secure too. Cool. So then the other most contentious under strategic direction was urban form and development. Honestly, relatively supported. People are asking for a few amendments throughout. An interesting one was more support for more mixed use activities throughout all of our zones. So at the moment, a lot of the commercial activities are focused on city centre zoning or like the Taradale or the Maranui town centres. People are saying, hey, look, start exploring these more pockets. So we have done that through the district plan. So we've got neighbourhood zones, local zones, town centre and city centre zones. And so that's a bit of variation. You've got some residential there while you've got your commercial too, to create that really livable environment. Heaps of interest in how we're protecting highly productive soils and then also protecting the activities on that highly productive soil. So not facilitating urban growth or development out onto the plains that are providing our cropping, but then likewise not locating sensitive activities where there might be a frost fan or where there might be high machinery use or sprays. So protection of that too. Really logically, people don't want urban form and development in high hazard areas, a no-brainer, and there was a lot of support for, well, what about light industrial growth, and are we providing enough in our district plan to facilitate light industrial growth? Cool. My favourite topic is subdivision. I've done a little graph here around, we got quite a few submissions on it, so 242 on the subdivision chapter. So when I showed around the transport, we had 66. So just the relativity, more interest is in the subdivision space. Honestly, pretty well supported. We've got a really enabling plan at the moment, and our proposed plan going forward is just probably tidying up a few of those things. So generally supported. There's a little bit of opposition to some of the provisions we've put forward as well, and then a few amends. But honestly, 50% support is bloody good. So under our subdivision, we've got a few themes. So please feel free to ask any questions, otherwise I'm just going to like talk. So our themes are, we've got the main opposition related to our introduction of a minimum lot size. So at the moment, if you want to do residential subdivision, we don't have a minimum lot size. And it's been really intentional. That's to encourage people to think, what environment do you want to create? And instead of doing a minimum lot, we've got design provisions. So can you provide for outdoor space, vehicle manoeuvring, private outdoor servicing? And so we have that still in our proposed plan, but we've also offered an alternative mechanism that if you don't want to provide the design requirements, hey, go and do a 350 minimum lot size. So us introducing this alternative, I think it's been a really helpful way because you're not locking people into design, but then you're also enabling vacant lot creation too. But we've had a bit of negative feedback there saying like, oh, 350, it's too big. Start looking at 200 metres squared, 300 metres squared, or don't go a minimum lot size again. My current position is we've got two available. Developers, you can choose either way. It's a pretty enabling plan.
Do you think part of that was not understanding that what we currently do is still an option as well?
For sure.
Yeah,
I think.
yeah.
Honestly, throughout this, I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding of what a district plan rule means versus in reality for the everyday person. So within our analysis of it, there's definitely recommendations around how we could clarify provisions to not be so blunt, I guess. The other one was around, we had a lot of support for development precincts. So our development precincts are Te Awa, Mission Hills and Whararangi Road. They are your perfect kind of planning and subdivision. So they've been master planned, and then you've got more enabling rules to enable fast development of that space. So people are saying, yes, please keep that, great idea, but they also wanted to introduce more areas in Napier into the development precincts. Unfortunately, it's not looking very supportive just because you'd have to go ahead and master plan all of that to enable that faster route to go ahead. The other part was for in our urban subdivision was seeking greater consistency with national policy direction. So we've got the national planning standard on urban development. And basically what that tells us is, yes, amenity, like in a transforming environment in an urban area where you're going through upzoning, amenity is not afforded your current status of amenity. So it's not that you're going to keep single-story houses forever. And if you go and introduce a three-story house, that's not a bad thing. So I think the submissions were saying, hey, lean on that national guidance more. Don't try and recreate the wheel. Pretty well supported. Cool. And now rural, it was really interesting. And this is an area that I'm probably going to recommend a bit of a change through us. So we had, I'll do the change as the third item. So the two main themes in rural subdivision was protect our highly productive land and then protect our highly productive activities on that land. So don't go and put urban growth in an area that may contradict someone doing cropping and spraying. Like, make sure there is a clear separation. Great planning, fully endorse that. Where I'm heading and where we got a lot of interest in, the most interest in our subdivision chapter, was rural lifestyle zoning. So at the moment, we've got this averaging requirement. So rural lifestyle zone applies to Priority, Taradale Hills and East Hills. And if you want to go ahead and do a subdivision, it's so convoluted, and I'll try and explain it really easily, but you have to go back and look at what the lot was on the day of November in the year 2000, what that size was, and then you have to figure out an averaging based on hectare. It's awfully confusing. A lot of people have said, you're not helping us develop here. And that was intentional at the time to make sure you have a mixed-use typology out in a rural area. What I'm recommending, based on the feedback from our community, is get rid of that average, just go with a minimum lot size, and that minimum lot size isn't changing. It's 5,000 metres squared at the moment. Honestly, it doesn't unlock heaps of land. It's not like this huge tidal wave of development would be provided. If you're just looking at area alone, you get about 330 new properties could be developed, and that's not going to be the reality, because we've gone and talked with our transport team, our development engineering team, our consents team, Hawke's Bay Regional Council, around the limitations. So you're going to have some slopes, some sites that are just too slopey that you can't develop, some that just can't have access, but the ones that there are still going to be opportunities within that. So though there might be 234, it might more be like low 200s. Because we've had a lot of positive feedback for that change, I think we'd be remiss not to endorse it. I'll just try and explain it a little bit further with these graphs. So this is our Taradale Hills and Priority. In the purple, they can already subdivide, and if we did opt to get rid of this averaging requirement, they'll be able to subdivide to a greater extent. That's included in the 200 or 330 gross. But the orange ones are the ones that would be afforded the opportunity to subdivide that don't already have that available to them. Yellow is no change. Our internal council teams have been really supportive of this change. We haven't faced any opposition at the moment, so it's well serviced. It's going to be a bit different in East Hills, and so though we will enable that in the district plan that you'll get rid of the, well, perhaps get rid of the averaging requirement, East Hills has so many private covenants on there. We don't have any control to get rid of the private covenants. That's a neighbour-to-neighbour agreement. So though there's a lot of unlocked orange on that map, it's not a true reflection of what would be unlocked. Just for the floor, is there any interest on that or thoughts, just because it is quite a major change versus our notified to maybe what we're going to recommend?
So can you just, so the minimum lot size you're proposing would be 5,000 square metres?
Yeah, and that's what it currently is as well, but it just has this added layer of average arbitrariness.
But then that also has to comply with the subdivisional, what is it, the engineering compliance, whatever it is.
Infrastructure.
For sure. Yeah, so you're still going to have your on-site wastewater ticked off, your access has to be approved. Earthworks will be quite a big thing because these are hilly environments. They're not productive environments either. They're not mapped as a highly productive quality soil. So in my planning opinion, I'm leaning towards, look, it's a great use of land.
Connie, just a question about that. So if there was a covenant, does that take precedence over the minimum size?
So a covenant is a private arrangement. It's not something that council would interfere with, and we can't go ahead and overtop it. A covenant's more in addition to the district plan. But because the way East Hills was developed, it's quite tightly developed with the private interest in it. So they could choose to get rid of them if they collectively made an agreement.
I think that this also ties in nicely with the government direction that we need to really look at providing more growth and houses around New Zealand, around the councils as well. So, and also clarify the plan, like Connie said, it's not a very clear rule, which is hard to understand and apply.
Yep, seems logical to, yeah.
I think that there are also areas that are probably less likely to be impacted by some of our hazards, so I think.
Yeah,
that
For
makes-
sure.
exactly.
There's like the odd land instability, but that would be an engineering matter. We're just providing the opportunity to explore further.
There's always that case by case.
Yeah.
assessment.
On the contrary, so this is the Kent Terrace area. This is our only large lot residential zone area. We did have a lot of requests to get rid of the averaging requirement here as well. My current position is to not recommend endorsing that. This environment is quite an established look and feel. And so just on here, it's the yellow lots that would be potentially entertained for further subdivision. But when you look at each lot, the house is kind of already in the middle. Where you draw a new boundary would be a little bit arbitrary. And I just think the removal of the averaging requirement for this environment wouldn't be conducive to the established field.
Can I just ask a question around that, thinking if the complications around subdivision are more site-specific, i.e. how they have applied their structures and things like that, then that would make it uneconomical in its own right, probably, to subdivide. So have you weighed that up against the, I suppose, the complication of retaining this dual system of how we deal with subdivision across the zones?
I think that's a really good point, for sure. I think with the large lot residential, just because it's quite a bespoke zone, we don't have much of it at all. And the potential unlocking is really, really limited in this instance. I think we'd be opening a can of worms that is a bigger challenge that it may be worth unlocking. That makes sense. I'm willing to take a different direction on it, for sure. Like I'm still in my thought process stage.
Yeah.
Okay. This is my next topic. It's noise. Had a lot of attention in it. Highly technical, and I'm still trying to grapple with it myself. The hearing's set down for 2025, so we still have some time to go through it. Just based on the little graph to the side, it's not a well-supported chapter at the moment, but I think there's a lot of misunderstanding because it's such a highly technical chapter. And there's probably going to be some modifications that we make throughout it based on technical advice, not necessarily my thoughts and opinions.
What are they opposing?
I'll get to the
Oh, okay,
oppositions and our themes here. So, huge amount of opposition to high density and mid density residential environment zone limits. There's no difference at the moment from what we currently have versus what we're proposing. It's because it's quite a technical chapter. We've got a maximum noise level at night time that I can't remember off the top of my head, but then we have and that's a instant noise. That's the max. And then during the daytime we have a noise limit that's measured over a 15-minute period. So there's been some confusion that in a high density or mid density zone, the perception is that there's more noise activity, but actually what the district plan proposes is no different to a general residential zone that we've already currently got. It's no different to our Hastings counterparts, Nelson, Dunedin. We're following national guidance on this. We could do a little bit more education on what that technical noise annotation means versus changing the district plan. When Paulina talked earlier around community groups collectively submitting, this was a really common point. And I get it, it's a changing environment, but when it comes to noise, so that was our main opposition, really. We had a bit of support here for protection of highly productive land and activities that occur in highly productive land, a lot on the frost fans and high noise generating machinery. I think that's a really reasonable thing to protect. We had some support, opposition, mixed views on the continued operation of the airport, the port and state highways network.
I should close them.
So from our network utility operators, they were really supportive, and that was a kudos to the pre-work that happened before the district plan was drafted. A lot of work was done with those providers on how do you manage noise on site and what is our national guidance on that. So much work happened there, and so they were really supportive of the plan. On the contrary, residents that live in close proximity to these have asked for some changes, and we're just going through and figuring out what those changes are and whether there's alternatives to those changes. I think it would be quite difficult to not follow national planning guidance on how to operate an airport and port and state highway. Like, we can't live without them, so we need to figure out the solutions to work with them.
Excuse me.
Just
So
turn the engines off.
I'm assuming like the airport would be like Parklands. The airport was there before Parklands, so.
Unfortunately, there's no provision for I was here first.
It should be.
There should be.
Could we have done a
Something
reverse-
that you signed when
reverse
you buy the
sensitivity
house.
It's
covenant
mainly
time?
the Johnny-come-latelys who are the NIMBYs.
No.
Can we do
Well,
something
reverse-
like that, like a reverse sensitivity covenant?
Look, reverse sensitivity covenants, they are a tool. They, in my experience in planning, they're not perfect tools because a reverse sensitivity covenant relates to that property. It doesn't relate to someone else making a complaint. And just because you're not at that property doesn't mean you can't.
No, I was just thinking for the land we've got left in Parklands, we'll put
Yeah.
something on it.
Oh, I think it would probably be on the development arm of Parklands to consider
Yeah.
what that looks like. Yeah, I'm just talking to the rules in the plan.
I think there is a memorandum of understanding already
Oh, okay.
for Parklands. Yeah, there was an agreement between the council and the airport. So when we provided those sections, there needed to be a consideration. They couldn't complain about or something along the lines like that. Do you know anything more about that?
Yeah, so I think that's something that the submitters need to get together and discuss because there was a memorandum of understanding.
Yep.
And it's just about, is that the right tool through a consent process, or do we actually have a plan that has the same kind of effect as what the tool in the memorandum of understanding would provide? So obviously new homes have a much better acoustic
Insulation.
performance than older homes. And so to a certain extent, the noise that's created from the airport is mitigated, especially to a certain extent. Yeah, it's interesting. I actually, a number of years ago, attended a workshop that was held by the airport, but we were invited, council was invited to attend, and it was, a lot of people came along who were in Parklands, and I was probing them to say, is this a concern for you? Is the noise a concern for you? You're on the flight path. And the majority, in fact, every single person that I spoke to said, oh no, we love it. We love going out and seeing the planes flying above us. And I'm sure that doesn't apply to everybody. But it was just really interesting at the time to get that feedback. I thought it was going to be a problem, and actually that was kind of one of the reasons why they lived there. So yeah, I'm sure there's lots of mixed views.
Oh, just one final point on noise, and then that comes to a close. We had some interest in the higher noise environment in our city centre, and it's been really intentional. Like, that's a mixed-use environment. We want to facilitate vitality in the city centre. And so to help manage that, a way that you manage noise is both the emitter needs to manage it, but then the receiver is also there to manage it. And so we've introduced a provision around acoustic management of residential areas in these mixed-use zoning. That's received two opinions, and it's very technical. It's very much, well, to what level of acoustic management do you go to and who pays? And so there's some things to work out with noise.
So does that mean, for example, that people looking to convert into residential spaces in the CBD, that may lead to additional costs to them to ensure they're meeting those acoustic management requirements?
Yeah, there definitely would be an element of that.
Yeah.
But for the health and safety of their ability to sleep in those environments.
Yeah, okay. I guess just bearing in mind that we are wanting to remove barriers to inner city living developments, so I guess just having that in mind as well.
Yeah.
But totally understand what you're saying. Yeah.
A big balance, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's that balance. Yeah. Richard, did you have something?
Yep. Just seeing you're on the noise side of things, Speedway. Did it sort of get through unscathed, or they
Yes.
can continue doing what they're doing?
Again, a real big kudos to the amount of work that happened in advance of the plan. That there was a lot of opportunities to get feedback from Speedway, and a lot of that got integrated in. They have made a submission, but it's amend and support. It's not opposition.
Yep. Okay, cool.
That brings my noise to an end. I'll sub out. Thank you.
Right, stormwater. So stormwater was a new chapter that we introduced to the proposed district plan. And so because it's new, I'll just give a bit of an explanation as to what it does. So essentially, we require all new development to attenuate their stormwater on site to a 1 in 10-year event. That was a requirement previously, but it was done as part of the code of practice through the engineering approval process. So in practical sense, no change, but it's just much more upfront to developers that this is a requirement, and they don't find out however many months down the track this is something that we're required to do. We've also introduced some new stormwater water quality provisions, and also the requirement to protect our overland flow paths. So for this chapter, we did receive a reasonable number of submissions, so 85 submission points and 48 further submissions. And they were on not just the stormwater chapter itself, but all the definitions that relate to that chapter and those activities, as well as the planning maps, because we have the overland flow paths within those planning maps. Which one do I push? This one? Yeah. Yep. Cool. So the themes that came through from those submissions, it was really quite diverse, actually. We had a lot of supporting submissions that we have this very clearly and upfront about our stormwater requirements in the district plan, rather than kicking it down the road to engineering approval. There was a great support for greater use of green infrastructure, so we're talking about swales and, I guess more nature-based mechanisms to capture and improve the quality of the stormwater. There were a number of submissions relating to our overland flow paths and how we manage these, and particularly how we map them, because they can be a bit of a moving feast. If you do a development on one site, that might influence the way that the water flows on neighbouring properties, and so how much ability have we got to change that mapping to ensure that everything is up to date along with overland flow paths. There was a number of submissions around wanting some greater specificity in terms of how we calculate the amount of stormwater that has to be attenuated on site. It is a very technical way of doing it, and they wanted to just be very clear about what their requirements are. So, it was really just around clarity. And there are a number of submissions, particularly from network utilities and also large-scale infrastructure, like the port and the like, NZTA, wanting exemptions for the on-site attenuation, stormwater attenuation requirements, and also the water quality requirements. Yeah, that's right. And just the last thing I wanted to say about stormwater is that the hearing isn't scheduled until early next year, so I'm still working through these points that were raised in submissions with our internal team, and also noting that there has been a shift in the way that we look to manage our stormwater over time. So what might have been appropriate in the PDP, we need to test that again with our new knowledge and our new approach to managing stormwater within the scope of the submissions, obviously. Watch this space.
Hi everyone. So before I head into notable trees, I'd just like to mention I am also working on the Tangata Whenua, Mana Whenua chapter and the activities on the surface of water chapter. None of these didn't have very many submissions and nothing was too contentious, so I won't be touching on them today, but just as a little disclaimer. So heading into notable trees, the purpose of this chapter is to provide for the identification and protection of trees within Napier that are of significance for their historical, cultural, botanical, amenity and or landmark values. We had 15 submission points on this chapter as well as 8 further submission points and 1 submission on the notable trees schedule and a further submission point on that as well. The themes that came through from these submissions were network utilities, private trees, biodiversity, and reference to the citywide reserve management plan. None of these themes were too contentious, and upon consideration, apart from recommending a few minor amendments, the chapter will stick to our original approach as per our Section 32 report. And next we have public access. The purpose of public access is to provide for connectivity throughout Napier. I have heard that previously public access was a contentious issue, meaning that within the proposed district plan, we have taken out all public access, all council-owned public access ways. Public access within Napier is already pre-existing, meaning that taking these out of the proposed district plan is not going to impact our current public access ways. However, the mission public access ways have merit to stay within the plan because these on greenfields and aren't council land. There are still mixed views on this issue. Even internally, we have mixed opinions. However, we did only get 9 submission points on the chapter, so not as many as I guess were predicted. Many of these issues we are still deliberating on and working out the position that we're going to take. And then lastly, I have coastal environment. This chapter houses the overarching objectives and policy frameworks to manage and protect the natural character and values of the coastal environment, as well as provisions to manage activities within this environment. There were 74 submission points on this chapter and then 20 further submissions. The themes that came through were more reference to the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, biodiversity, protecting the natural character and landscape, more reference towards the port and its functions within this area. And something to note as well, there are no rules within this chapter and some submitters want this amended, so we do have specific rules. We're still working on a recommendation for this and working internally as to how we're going to approach those.
So, what sort of rules? Did the submitters who wanted rules actually say what it was that they were seeking?
Yes and no, they did mention that they would want to just have more rules to give effect to the policies within the chapter, if that makes any sense.
Like some people, for example, want to protect the biodiversity around the coastal area, so they were worried about things like that protect the dotterel, for example, or avoid dogs around, or things like that. So some of them might be appropriate to consider outside of the district plan.
Right.
And the rules for the coastal environment for the Napier are managed through the zoning. So the zone have the rules. So you still, if something needs a consent, an activity needs a consent, it triggers the rule under the zone. But you can also look in your assessment. You can look at the objectives and policies of the coastal environment as well.
Okay.
Kia ora koutou. I think I'm your halfway mark, so this is exciting. All right, so I'm going to touch on a few zones and some district-wide matters. So the first one is our Papakainga chapter. Papakainga was a new chapter for the purpose of allowing or providing for communal housing on Māori land. This, you can see the number of submissions. It was not hugely contentious, so people were mostly seeking amendment to make it work for our area. One issue or one topic is that there was a request that came in to remove the restriction of Papakainga on Māori land specifically. So a couple of mana whenua entities, and was supported by Kāinga Ora and a couple of other entities, sought that we remove it to allow for Papakainga on any kinds of land. Right now, the thinking is that we wouldn't remove this explicitly from the plan, because right now the rules actually allow for papakainga to happen on general title in a way that's in line with the intention of what we want to provide for, which is for housing that stays for in Māori care for the long term. Whereas opening it up or removing that criteria would not actually align with what we're trying to provide for, and would just turn it into actually more restrictive for what we're trying to do, because residential development can happen under the zones anyway. So that's the thinking right now. But apart from that, it was mostly about consistency. My next chapter is the Natural Features and Landscapes chapter. This is about protecting the things that we have in our natural environment in the beautiful Napier. We only have one very significant natural feature, which is considered a Section 6 matter, which is our Otatara Pā. Apart from that, we've got a couple of special character and features and landscapes. A significant amount of submissions, but no contentious issues, mostly about providing for activities where it might be appropriate in those areas that are not Otatara Pā. And apart from that, network utilities, consistency, transport, things like that. Temporary activities was the next chapter. So again, not hugely contentious, but a topic that's important to us. This chapter looks at things like I've got in the pictures. It's about construction and structures related to events and temporary noise events, things like that. Not contentious, only 22 submissions and mostly just amendments. However, something to bring to your attention is that there have been a couple of requests to extend the amount of time that scaffoldings like these can stay up. And that has its perks of allowing or enabling activity in the city, which is something that we want to do, but it's a bit of a balancing act of seeing how we do that without impinging on the amenity of the residents that live in areas like around where you might have a concert, like Church Road or Mission. So if we were to, say, extend how long it stays up, what's the impact to a person who lives in that area? So no specific stance on this just yet, but just trying to figure out a balance between the two.
So the submissions there in support, to amend, they were to enable, or were they opposing?
There was both. So there was submissions in seeking for us to remove some of the restrictions or make them longer, but then also in response there was further submissions which said this is too significant to the area and it impacts the residents in a too significant way. So so it goes both ways, understandably. Yeah. Signs. So signs is a hot topic. Signs is something that our community had a lot of feedback on. And actually, all of the chapters that I've talked about, the feedback is very similar to what we what we received when we went out with the draft. Really similar themes, nothing really new. Signs nothing particularly new came up. There was no submissions from retailers, which is I think it's a good sign of how signal of how the chapter was drafted. There was a couple of consistency matters, making sure that we enable signage where it's appropriate, so things like reserves, but obviously that's definitely an amendment that we would make. Things like traffic signage, signage for transport. So generally it was pretty supported. It was just a few consistencies to clean up. But because this issue is about something that actually impacts lots of people and people have a lot of opinions about it, it was something that we wanted to communicate. Awesome. Cool. Open space, natural open space and sport recreation zones received a moderate amount of submissions as well. There was about 50 submissions per zone chapter, mostly from the same people, mostly saying the same thing, mostly about consistency, providing for things where they were appropriate and making sure that it wasn't impacting on the people who live around those areas. But one thing to perhaps bring to your attention was there was a couple of requests both ways regarding commercial or supporting activities that are next to these open space reserve areas, which We know them to be green spaces, places where the community comes together and really adds to the value and the vibrancy of the city, and whether we think it's appropriate to have commercial activities like cafes or ice cream stands, and to what degree we allow that to happen, because it definitely is the type of activity that we want in the city, but we just have to figure out what is the kind of the threshold to how much of that we want to see. So yeah, those were the main issues for that, and I think that's me.
Okay, so historic heritage. So there's a number of chapters that sit within the kind of umbrella of historic heritage, and so I'll go through them sort of bit by bit. But overall, we had 311 submission points and 77 further submissions on historic heritage. And when you break those down, the historic heritage chapter had 96 submission points and 23 further submissions. We have a number of heritage overlays and precincts, those are our areas, 212 submission points and 53 further submissions. And even though the site significance to Māori chapter was not included in the proposed district plan, that's a variation that will come later. There was still a small number of submissions on that. And of course, the schedules 3 and 4, the relevant definitions and the planning maps all relate to all of those heritage-related chapters as well. And so I've covered off the response to those submissions within the one report. There's also 33 submissions on heritage provisions that sit within other chapters, and they'll be dealt with by the author of those other chapters. So just some themes that have been coming through on those submissions. So I've just grouped these into like individually listed items and groups, and then the wider areas as another slide. So overall, it was actually mostly supportive, which was pretty amazing given how contentious it could be. But generally, they're just seeking changes to correct errors and improve usability of the plan and clarity and those sorts of things. So just a bit of fixing that needs to be done. We did, however, receive 13 submissions seeking the removal of some items or groups that we scheduled within the district plan. So that's, hey, my house has been included, I don't want it to be on the list, can you remove it, please? We also had one submission seeking the addition of 4 new historic heritage items. Yes.
So the 13 submissions, were they all new ones, or were they some of those existing who want to be taken? Are they all new heritage?
They were all new. Yeah. No existing submitted. They were all. They had the opportunity to, but we didn't receive any submissions from them. Okay. So we also received requests through submissions for the addition of new rules, providing for minor additions to heritage buildings and structures. So things like solar panels, service connections, heat pump units, those sorts of things, and to enable, network utilities and the like as well. And there was also a general theme from people, particularly who have homes that were proposed for heritage, to ensure that there were non-regulatory incentives to support those owners if their houses were to be listed as heritage. So trying to rebalance that public-private good element to it. So because this is quite a technical topic in terms of, I don't necessarily have the heritage expertise to be able to answer some of these questions. We have had to engage some additional heritage advice on a number of those submissions. So just waiting for that to come through before we can have a final recommendation. Okay, so the heritage areas, again, mostly supportive, but seeking to change a number of provisions to correct errors and for usability, and the same request for those minor additions and service connections and the like. There were a number of submissions, particularly in the Mariwa and Napier South areas, that were worried about the impact that the medium and high density residential zones might have on the values of those heritage areas, which in my opinion is a very valid point to make. And so that is something that we have asked our heritage experts to comment on, and how we can manage that interface. We received a significant number of submissions from Napier South asking to extend the Napier South heritage area to other parts of Napier South. I do suspect that's because we also have the medium and high density areas, and that this is a way of protecting them from being rezoned. However, they all also were put forward some very good arguments as to why they think they should be in the heritage area. And again, we're seeking some advice on that matter. Right. Okay, so I'll move on to rezoning. So we received a significant number of rezoning requests. I was very surprised when I drew up a map as to what all these submissions were and where they were located. But there were some really clear themes that came through. So a lot of submissions related to the high and medium density residential zones. People didn't want to be in it. They didn't want to be next to it. They thought it should be elsewhere, just not on my property. And so that was a really strong theme that came through. I think we actually only received one submission asking to be in the medium density zone. Also a number of rezoning requests in the area south of Napier. So we're talking about Riverbend, Waverley, Willowbank, those sorts of areas, Miani, that sort of area. And also to the north of Napier, so Bayview. And so they were looking to rezone to a much more residential or future urban sort of zone. So maybe not now, but we want to signal that it could be in the future. We had a submission on Ahuriri Station, looking to rezone that to future urban, and from Moranui Golf Club to include a new golf course precinct. And then we had a number of requests primarily where there was a neighbourhood commercial centre and there was an existing commercial activity on, say, a residentially zoned site. They wanted the zoning to reflect what's actually operating on that site. So they wanted to change to commercial of some description. So yeah, we've got a lot of working through all these to figure out which ones have merit and which ones don't.
What do the colours mean on the map?
Yeah, so the map, that's the zoning, and it's very hard to see, but you might be able to see on there that there's like some numbers. So those are where all the rezoning requests happen. So they're kind of in little clusters. Yeah.
And with that, I want to ask, would you like us to come back to you once the way that we're probably going to deal with these rezoning requests, some of them would be pretty straightforward because, as Claire said, the activity is already in place, or it makes sense. Sometimes there is a commercial activity right beside the commercial zone land and they want to be rezoned. But we would develop that criteria, go through that criteria, and there's two options that we have for coming back to you. Either we come back to you with the criteria, discuss the criteria, and then we go and assist this site, or whether you want us to come back to you and show you in the map, do a session especially on rezoning and go one by one so you're aware of what the community is requesting. The reason I ask is because rezoning is quite a contentious thing. There will be some that you probably want to be across, but I'll take some direction from you whether you want us to do that or come earlier and decide on the criteria.
I know personally I've been asked about a few, so it'd be quite nice to know where they sit.
Yeah. Sure. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, rezoning is tricky because the requests that have come in, they typically don't have all of the technical information that would normally support doing a plan change. And of course, we have natural justice issues to deal with whereby we don't, the process is already almost complete and there's no opportunity for further submissions from neighbours who might be affected by, you know. So it's a very complex matter.
Yeah.
And yeah,
So
we need a little bit more discussion. With you
so I
guys.
guess what I'm hearing from you is that it's unlikely that we would be changing anything that's currently in the PDP?
It depends on the submission. So there were some submissions that had a bit of technical information,
Right.
as well as some that just made sense
Yeah.
from well, the activity's already there. What is the change?
Yeah.
Whereas there are other ones where it perhaps didn't have as much sort of supporting reasoning behind it.
So I guess if for us, it would be useful to have a summary
Yeah.
of the main ones.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
so that if we were approached, we at least have a level of knowledge about why it was changed or not changed.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So the hearing for rezoning, I think, is set in the middle of next year. So we
Okay.
have a little bit of time
Yeah.
to go through that.
Yeah.
All right, we're gonna talk about the variations that we're planning for the three variations, just reminding you the three variations to the plan, and I'm gonna pass to Jeriel, she's leading the first one.
Yeah, so we talked about SNAs a little bit earlier this year. So SNAs fall under this chapter that we haven't notified yet, but are hoping to notify soon. So just an update. Last time I came to you, we had really strong signals that central government was going to introduce a new bill. Since that workshop, they have introduced a new bill, and it actually includes a little bit more restriction than when I came to you, than what we had thought from the signals would come. So that means that we are still waiting to receive the ecologist's report, and now considering this new information that we've got, and we received the ecologist's report yesterday. So I'll come back to you with some options that now take into consideration the new bill that we actually have in front of us. Keeping in mind it is still a bill, so nothing is actually enforceable, or we don't have to change tack at all until it receives royal assent. But it would be great to present something to you so that we can then go to the communities who it affects as pre-engagement, and not just the affected households, but also the interested parties as well. We want to talk to them before we notify a chapter, aiming to notify a chapter in October or November later this year. Then basically once we do that, the same process kicks off, and we'll be going through the same Schedule 1 process that we'll come back to you with what they said, and then we'll go into the hearings process as well. So yeah, any questions about that? Yeah.
Just through you, Mayor Wise, just a question around timing. That feels a little later than I think what we expected to notify. Does that mean that pushes out our hearing timeframes, which I think we were planning to be completed around July?
At this stage, it didn't, because we had allowed for so much time. But yeah, if it was to go any further, it would make it quite tight. Right now, it hasn't affected the timings at all.
I just suggest my guidance is if you can keep it to within before July, I think that's wise.
Yeah.
Question through you, Madam Mayor. Did we make any submissions on this bill when it was at select committee?
The Napier City Council
Yeah.
didn't specifically. I know that the LG and Taituara did make submissions, but not us as an individual. Yeah.
Kia ora koutou. The second variation we have to work on is natural hazards. And I've been given this piece of work in my new role, whakaat. so it's going to be an interesting time. So following earlier workshops that I understand you have had on this topic, we distributed the issues and options paper that you might recall back in March. So I've been working through the feedback on that chapter, that paper. And the purpose of that paper really was to gauge community views to help inform this variation of the district plan. So we had 29 submitters to the issues and options paper, including a mix of individuals and organisations. Organisations such as Kāinga Ora, Unison, Power Co Limited, Te Whatu Ora Health New Zealand, Ravensdown, Forest and Bird, and EQC, the Natural Hazards Commission. And we've also recently started a series of meetings with myself and colleagues at Regional Council who are very interested in working alongside us as we consider the issues for this variation. So there's generally positive support from people making comment on the issues and options paper. So this included a few items, including having the hazard maps sitting external to the district plan so that they can be more easily updated as and when we get new research and evidence without the expense and time required to do a plan change. And I understand that's the approach that Auckland Council have taken as well. Feedback also was generally positive about being more directive in the district plan about how we manage hazard-sensitive activities in locations that are at risk of hazards. We also had generally positive feedback around looking at the cumulative effects of hazards as a matter of discretion when considering resource consent applications. I won't go through everything here, but just another one to point out is that there good support, solid support from people around managing coastal inundation and pluvial flood risks in the variation, including setting floor heights based on 1% AEP data and not setting those under the Building Act, so actually putting provisions for that in the plan. So other considerations that we're keeping in mind as we draft this variation is obviously we're just waiting to hear from Ministry for the Environment about a national policy statement on natural hazard decision making. We understand that's not far away. We're also, as I said, meeting with Regional Council who have quite a bit of work ahead of them in updating the regional policy statement. And working with colleagues internally who are looking at reviewing and revising their stormwater master plan, which will feed into this as well. So the timeframes going forward, as you'll appreciate, we've got a lot of information to gather, unpicking a few things around relevance of data that we've got at the moment. Is there other information that we need to collect, other modelling that we need to do? So we're looking to come back to you towards later, the last few months of this year with a workshop or two to discuss options with the aim of getting something out for notification early 2025, which means working through the process. We're looking at, we hope, a hearing about October 2025. We envisage there'll be a lot of interest in this variation.
So Annie, just bearing in mind your comment earlier about that June, July.
Yeah, I'm surprised we're that late.
The main reason with the natural hazard delays have been, there's a couple of reasons. One obviously is that we have a little bit of change of officers leading the chapter. So there was a little bit of delay on that. Now that we have Michelle on board, she's fully dedicated to that. But also, we've been waiting for MFE, the NPS on natural hazard. We don't want to be pushing along and then the NPS come a couple of weeks later and then we have to change things. So there has been, that's one of the main reasons as well for delaying the natural hazard chapter. We have the new information that came from the cyclone, so the Regional Council is doing a whole lot of assessments through that. that avenue. So it's a very changing environment, and trying to collate all that information, it takes time. So we want to be realistic, and I think even that time frame is quite tight, ambitious, yeah.
Through you, Mayor Wise, I think my only observation there is I think this environment will be continuously changing, and I guess, well, my expectation is that whatever we put together in terms of district plan framework in this space will be able to navigate that changing environment. And so I am concerned if we wait on one thing, there'll be something else that will also be a reason to wait for. And so you're spanning an election cycle with the delays that you're talking about, which I think brings with it some risk as well. And so I'd just suggest that if there is a way to have this brought back into the fold of the district plan hearing process and decisions that we're talking about July, I think that would be a whole lot better in lots of ways. I am concerned if we wait, we will have something else to wait for as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We are in a very much changing environment from government direction, and yes, we are going to take the approach with the information that we have. Despite that we haven't received the NPS, we're going to go ahead with determining that policy framework for natural hazard.
I think you should take that possibly offline and see if there's a way to reconsider that, because that, another year and a quarter before we're getting to decision-making stage steps it outside of the process that we're running for the rest of the plan. Leave it with you to reconsider.
Yeah, no, we are definitely aiming to have it to catch up so we can have a full district plan operative by the end of 2025. Really, that we're having the same objectives that you have.
Okay, so sites of significance to Māori. This is something that we've been working on since before the draft, and it's just one of those topics that does take a long time. So earlier in the year, we held a hui with representatives from Mana Ahuriri Trusts, Mangahararu Tangatu Trust, the Tai Whenua, and Ngāti Pāro, and it was agreed. It was actually probably the best hui that I've ever been at. It was amazing. So much discussion about options, and but it was agreed at that hui that we would essentially nominate a person or a couple of people to work alongside the council to represent everyone's interests, and also it established the steering group, which was those representatives at the hui. The first task was to review the material that we'd already had created, which was to identify those sites, the narrative of those sites, the extent of them, etc. And then there was some discussion at that hui around the management approach. So that's the kind of rules, I guess, that would sit within the plan. And the idea was put forward that we could have a wānanga with the steering group to further, I guess, draw out what that management approach would be. But we have had a fairly good steer already from the steering group on that. We then need to undertake landowner engagement, and there actually isn't that many sites that are on privately owned property. A lot of it is either existing sites, so they're already in the district plan, or sites that are on council-owned or DOC property. And then we pull together some draft provisions, and then we notify the variation. So we are targeting to have the variation come through to decision stage in July. We have canvassed a number of options for if things go awry, as they always do. And so that's been canvassed with the steering group in terms of, well, we could do what is sort of non-contentious and get that through as the variation, and then the more contentious stuff could be at a later stage. So there are options for us, but we're definitely very keen on targeting that July next year for the hearings for this. Any questions?
So the hearing committee has already selected a couple of independent commissioners that would sit in the panel for the PDP. And we're going to go to Namanuka Otiiwi next week, as well with a range of potential Maori commissioners as well that can be part of the panel for certain hearings. We have scheduled tentative the hearing. They should be already earmarked in the councillor's calendar for starting in November, finishing in July 2025. And because hearing can be very costly, obviously you're paying independent commissioners. We are recommending to manage adequately the budget that we have no more than 3 commissioners attending a hearing at each time.
And would that typically be 2 independents and 1?
Yes. So the government direction, we talked briefly about the array of changes that have been happening from a central government. The first phase of the RMA reform has already happened. We got repealed the Natural and Built Environment Act, and the Spatial Planning Act was repealed in 2023. Then we got into phase 2, which we are now. We have the fast track approval bill and also some other changes that were introduced in 2024. So we're navigating through this changing environment, and the next phase of this RMA reform, obviously phase 3, we don't really know when it's going to happen, but that is the replacement of the RMA. The indication has been, though, any changes, it would take quite a long time to take effect, even if the RMA gets completely taken out. There would be a phase for councils to adopt the new legislation. So we're talking about a time frame for about 10 years to do that. And Fleur is going to talk about the other changes.
Sure. Yeah, so this is really just a snapshot of phase 2 of this reform, RM reform. So I'm on the Taituara practitioners, RM practitioners panel, and so MFE and MHUDs and all those government agencies, we bring together, they talk to the group and go through some of the proposals, the early thinking, quite early on. So I'm really lucky that I get exposure to some of this stuff before it becomes more publicly known. But some of the things that are coming through that are public is obviously the fast track approval bill, which has already come out, but is yet to become royal assent into an act. Changes to the National Policy Statement for Indigenous Biodiversity. There's changes to the NPS for urban development, highly productive land, freshwater management, the new natural hazard decision making. There's new national direction on infrastructure that's coming through. Obviously, ultimately, the replacement of the Resource Management Act, and then the Going for Growth, which is kind of hitting the headlines now.
Yeah, and we had a session last week about this one. There's a couple of points I want to raise about that. I mean, obviously, the government wants to provide houses and really enable housing across New Zealand. Very strong direction there. So opening greenfield growth. It says intensification in the right places, but it's really pushing for more development across greenfield areas, which particularly that conflicts with the protection of highly productive land in a way. But the way that has been mentioned is that council would have to live zone, and by live zoning I mean having the right zone in the district plan for 30 years of growth. So that is basically what we're doing with the future development strategy at the moment. It's planned for 30 years of growth, but we only put in the district plan what we need for the next 10 years, not 30 years. So that is a whole lot more rezoning that we're going to be required to do with this change, with this announcement. And obviously the issue would be of how we're going to service these areas. And there has been a high provision there that developer would have to come up with the cost of providing for that infrastructure. And if they don't provide those costs, then they cannot develop that land. So at least, it provides a little bit of safety net for councils as well. But the direction is Tier 1 and Tier 2 authority, which Napier is a Tier 2 authority, will have to start enabling a lot of rezoning, a lot of land for development.
So I think that the key message here around all this change, we're trying to create, we're trying to actually pull together recommendations on the district plan, whilst in this hailstorm of change and government direction. And so, we need to be mindful of what that is, but that hasn't yet become law. And so what we're doing for our recommendations is we still need to abide by what the law is, what is the current NPS, what is the current rules in the RMA. And we can't really preempt that, until such time that it does become actual law and be adopted.
Just through you. With the rewriting of the RMA, does that mean that people who are accredited commissioners, current RMA, will have to retrain? Do you think?
Potentially, yeah, I would
If
say
there's
so.
big
because
changes.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'd say so.
new legislation, yeah.
So bearing in mind the current environment and the changing environment, what is the potential risks for us in continuing with the PDP? Could we end up in a position where we have actually adopted the finalised plan and then have to go back out again and so make changes, go through the whole process of consulting and all the rest of it? Or will there potentially be a provision, because central government might understand the position they've put us in, where there might be a shortcut process so that we wouldn't have to do that?
Yeah. Okay, so yes, they are very aware of the amount of work that this will create for councils, and for a number of the changes that they're looking to introduce, they have talked about not requiring the first schedule process, which is the process that we're going through now, or there is a first schedule process, but it's shortened, so to say maybe not have appeal rights, or to have a limited amount of time, much more limited amount of time for submissions, or to make things faster, easier, less expensive for councils. And we also need to bear in mind that we are always operating in the environment in which we are right now, knowing that this will change in the future and that there's always the opportunity for further variations or plan changes in the future that will tidy up the new direction that comes through from council. So I don't think we can hold waiting, as
No, I agree.
Deputy Mayor Brosnan's, said before, we can't hold because there's always going to be change.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I just thought, would there be perhaps some understanding
Yes,
and
I think there's
ability to...
definitely some
so there is.
understanding.
Good. Okay, that's good to know.
And we obviously have taken into consideration all those MPSs into the proposed district plan. So whatever is currently signal, we have included it in, despite that some of them are only at the consultation stages. We always try to do that.
Rhonda?
And this is my last slide anyway, sorry.
So just as part of that, how it says greenfield growth and stuff, is there a section on, like resilience and not building in places where it's not good?
Yes, yes, that's what it says there. If you see that, you read the three.
In the right places, but yeah.
That I think that the message there is natural hazards. Don't build where there are natural hazards. Yeah. And my last slide is basically what I've been talking about. We're going into hearings. The team is very busy. You will see the range of chapter that we're trying to get ready for hearings. So preparing those Section 42 reports, and then the hearings would be a process that we have to go through until July, hopefully having decisions in late 2025. That's us.
Okay. Any further questions, folks? I think next time we'll get you, because it's hard work for you as presenters when you were the last workshop of the day.
I know.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Can we make a note that next district plan workshop will be earlier in the day?
We hear.
I know, yes.
Yeah.
Own day.
Yes, sorry about that, and thank you very much. I thought that you were very,
Very attentive.
yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. No,
Well
that
done.
was a really useful update. And yeah, we look forward to the next one with the next group of chapters.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thanks,
Thank
team.
you.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.